When reflecting on the dynamics of human relationships, it's impossible not to ponder why boundless availability sometimes leads to others valuing a person significantly less. When someone is constantly on call, always ready to respond, regardless of how they are treated or how much effort the other person puts into maintaining the interaction, they inadvertently send a clear, unambiguous signal. The other person doesn't need to take any significant steps to keep them in their life. This creates the illusion of an endless resource that will never run out. The great thinker Carl Gustav Jung once profoundly observed that what we internally deny or undervalue in ourselves inevitably manifests in the external world. If, deep down, a person doesn't value themselves enough to set boundaries and demand due respect, they will unfortunately attract into their circle those who are also incapable of truly appreciating them. Herein lies a harsh but undeniable reality that few are willing to accept. Anything that comes easily, that requires no effort or struggle, is very rarely accorded true, deep value. This is paradoxical, yet a fact. Let's delve deeper into this idea. When something becomes scarce, when its quantity is limited or access to it is difficult, the human desire to possess it multiplies, sometimes reaching incredible proportions. Conversely, when something is always readily available, when it seems infinitely abundant, people tend to take it for granted, mistakenly believing that this source will never run out or disappear. This is not a manifestation of cruelty or malice. It is a fundamental principle by which human consciousness functions, embedded in our psychology. Thus, if a person is constantly ready to connect, immediately responds to all messages and calls, never dares to say no, and most importantly, makes someone an absolute priority in their life, while for that other person they are merely one of many options, then such a person becomes entirely predictable. And the human mind, with its remarkable ability to adapt and seek novelty, tends to ignore and devalue what is well known and holds no mystery. This is precisely where the insidious, subtle, yet powerful trap of excessive availability lies, from which it can sometimes be so difficult to escape. When an individual makes excessive efforts for someone who doesn't reciprocate with similar diligence, they might mistakenly believe they are expressing their affection or devotion. However, in reality, they unconsciously convey to the other person the perception of themselves as something self-evident, a given that requires no reciprocal effort. This is the insidious trap that many often fall into. They feel neglected, yet continue to remain constantly available. They don't receive equivalent reciprocation or care, but persist in their attempts. They realize they are not a top priority for the other, but still continue to wait to be chosen eventually. Each time a person settles for less than they deserve, their perceived value in the eyes of others steadily diminishes. For the truth is, if a person does not set and uphold the boundaries of their own dignity, others will rarely treat them with due respect. As an illustrative example of this principle, consider the story of a man who was always at the disposal of a woman he admired. Whenever she contacted him, he responded instantly, without delay. When she cancelled planned meetings, he always showed unwavering understanding without reproach. And if she started to distance herself, he, conversely, intensified his efforts, striving to bridge the gap. He genuinely believed that by doing so, he was proving his love, demonstrating loyalty and genuine interest. However, in reality, he unconsciously instilled in her the belief that no matter how much she ignored or neglected him, he would always be there, always available. Over time, this led to the woman losing all interest in him as a potential partner. Why did this happen? Because she never had to make any effort for him. She never felt the threat of losing him. His presence became so unconditional and guaranteed that it eventually ceased to be intriguing or valuable, turning into something commonplace. Then one day, his usual availability suddenly vanished. He stopped responding immediately to requests, ceased accepting any excuses, and was no longer a consistently reliable or predictable option. At that very moment, a perceptible shift occurred in the situation. The person accustomed to his constant presence suddenly felt a need to seek him out, began to ponder the reasons for his absence and acutely became aware of the void that had formed. Such is the nature of the human mind. Individuals truly begin to value only what they deeply believe is at risk of being lost. The most crucial lesson to grasp is this: it's not about deliberately feigning disinterest or ignoring someone for manipulation. The essence lies in the profound understanding that boundless availability for anyone who doesn't show due respect or doesn't deserve such treatment is the shortest path to undermining one's own worth. If someone knows for certain that a person will always be there, regardless of how they are treated, what incentive do they have to truly value their presence? If a person sincerely desires respect from others, they must first and foremost respect themselves. If they want to be sought after, they must first demonstrate that their presence is not for just anyone. There is a significant psychological impact of absence and the manifestation of the scarcity principle. Most people often mistakenly believe that if they distance themselves from someone, that person will simply forget them. That if they stop persistent attempts at communication, the connection will be irrevocably lost. That if they are not constantly present in someone's life, their place will immediately be taken by someone else. However, the truth is the opposite. When a person disappears from view, their value not only doesn't diminish, but on the contrary, significantly increases. The renowned psychologist Carl Jung asserted that what you resist persists. This means that the more an individual clings to another, the more they are perceived as a given, as something guaranteed. But when a person consciously withdraws, when they cease to be easily accessible, the other person's perception automatically transforms. For absence is not merely felt as a gap, it turns into a profound void that the other person feels an urgent need to fill. The scarcity principle has a profound influence on human consciousness. The human mind is inherently programmed to place greater value on what is not easily accessible. Just think, when a certain object or resource is presented in abundance and is always freely available, people tend to take it for granted. However, as soon as that same object becomes rare or limited, a strong desire to possess it suddenly arises. This same psychological phenomenon is actively leveraged by major brands when they announce the imminent depletion of stock or launch limited time offers. The reason for this approach lies in the very essence of human psychology. The realization of potential loss or the inability to obtain something makes it significantly more valuable in the eyes of the potential consumer. Now, let's consider how this same principle manifests in interpersonal relationships. If a person is constantly fully available to another, if they immediately respond to every message and always demonstrate their interest, regardless of the reciprocation, their perceived value gradually erodes. However, when there is a deliberate or natural withdrawal, when a person ceases to be consistently within easy reach, the scarcity principle is immediately activated in the other individual's mind. It is at this moment that a radical shift in perception occurs, and the former attitude can be replaced by a new, more appreciative perspective. The psychological imprint left by one's absence is profound. When an individual who previously took another person for granted suddenly withdraws, their mind initiates a complex recalibration process. This happens because the familiar, guaranteed proximity suddenly ceases to be a reality. Here is the sequence of internal events that unfolds. Initially, there is a phase of denial. The absence does not cause serious alarm, as the person is convinced that the one who left will soon return. At this stage, a true sense of loss has not yet formed. However, an internal discomfort gradually increases. The individual begins to distinctly feel a gap, a gaping emptiness left by the departed presence. Objects and moments that previously held no value now begin to evoke deep nostalgia and longing. Following this, the person's mind transitions to an active search for rational explanations for what happened. Agonizing questions arise. What is the reason for this departure? Has someone else entered their life? Has the past relationship truly been forgotten? At this moment, anxiety emerges and gradually intensifies. If the absence continues, remaining unchanged, a radical transformation in perception occurs. The person begins to look at the one who left with an entirely different perspective. Pleasant moments and positive qualities associated with that person surface in their memory. Deep doubts and self-critical reflections about their own oversight and undervaluation arise. All this internal metamorphosis is a direct consequence of the former closeness no longer existing. In the realm of interpersonal relationships, a scenario often features an individual who feels their contribution to the union significantly outweighs the reciprocation received. This person often displays a tireless willingness to compromise, demonstrates an unwavering capacity for forgiveness, and exerts significant effort to maintain the connection. However, after a series of disappointments and dissatisfaction, they decide to distance themselves. It's important to emphasize that this action is not a tactical maneuver or a manipulative strategy. It is driven by a deep awareness of their self-worth and a conviction in their right to be treated with greater dignity. Initially, the partner may remain indifferent, and the absence of the first person seems to hold no significance. Nevertheless, over time, the situation undergoes substantial changes. The other individual begins to acutely feel their absence, recall shared moments, and gradually comprehend the magnitude of losing something truly meaningful. When attempts are made to restore the past connection, the moment is irrevocably lost because during their absence, this person has evolved into an individual who no longer required what previously caused emotional discomfort. The important lesson to learn from such a story is this: a person's absence holds substantial significance. Their distancing transforms how others perceive them and contributes to an increase in their perceived value. However, the key point is that if an individual decides to withdraw, it must be dictated solely by self-care, not by the expectation of an external reaction. It's not about deliberately disappearing to wait for someone's return. It's about genuine liberation from attachment, as the person realizes there is no need to pursue anyone to validate their own worth. It is then, when true detachment occurs, supported by a deep inner conviction, that changes are observed in the individual's energy field. And it is at this moment that others begin to perceive the individual completely differently. When one ceases to be available to someone who failed to truly appreciate their worth, changes occur not only in the dynamics of the relationship, but also within the individual themselves. The renowned psychologist Carl Jung stated, "That which you do not confront in your life comes back to you in the form of fate." This profound statement implies that if someone continues to remain open and available to someone who relegates them to a secondary or insignificant role, such behavior is actually a direct reflection of their own internal relationship with themselves. However, when the decision to withdraw is made, when a person truly distances themselves, their energy field undergoes a transformation, and others instantly sense this new vibration. An internal shift occurs from a state of neediness to genuine independence. Up until the moment a person decided to let go, their energy field was permeated with a sense of lack. They sought to be chosen, looked for external approval, and experienced deep anxiety, believing that if this person left, something profoundly important would be lost. But at the very moment the individual realizes they have no need to pursue anyone to validate their own worth, a radical internal shift occurs. They cease to depend on external approval, are freed from the constant anxiety of waiting for a message, a sign, or a response. There is a full restoration of control over their own energy, which is now no longer wasted on someone who, in essence, does not deserve it. Something truly fascinating emerges here. Even without a single word being spoken, others sense this change. The energy a person radiates is precisely the energy they attract. If someone is in a state of neediness or scarcity, they typically attract those who can recognize and exploit that vulnerability. Conversely, if a person lives in a state of emotional abundance, they attract people who show respect and value what they have to offer. Thus, when others perceive someone as confident, self-sufficient, and possessing strong self-esteem, a natural attraction arises, for this person no longer exudes desperation and doesn't project the energy of someone willing to do anything to be chosen. They no longer try to prove their worth, they simply exist in their power, and that is entirely sufficient. Consider an example. There was a man who, for many months, was obsessed with a woman who did not reciprocate his feelings. He was always available to talk to her, constantly sought excuses for conversations, and consistently tried to impress her, but she showed no reciprocal interest. This continued until one day, after much emotional exhaustion, he decided to let go. He stopped seeking her attention, ceased giving her all his energy, and no longer saw her as essential for his happiness. He did this not as a strategy, not waiting for her reaction. He simply realized that his time and worth were too great to continue wasting them aimlessly. And here something completely unexpected happened. Over time, she herself began to seek him out. She wondered why he had changed. She felt his absence in a completely different way, and suddenly the power dynamic shifted. However, the most crucial point was not that she started seeking him, but that by the time she did, he had already lost interest in her, for in the process of letting go, he himself became someone who no longer needed to be chosen. The true key to a profound transformation of personal energy lies in changing one's level of availability. When an individual ceases to be universally accessible, this action radically alters not only how others perceive them, but also their own self-perception. In the past, one might have been inclined to settle for less, but now they assert their right to more. If they passively waited to be chosen, now they actively determine who is truly worthy of being in their life. Previously, their presence was open to everyone. Now their energy becomes not a universal right, but rather a valuable privilege. The most fundamental lesson that stems from this is when a shift occurs in one's personal energy, there is also a change in the type of people one allows into their circle. For someone who truly understands their own worth will never fear losing someone who is incapable of appreciating that worth. A natural question arises: how does the other person react when they begin to sense that the presence of someone who was always there is no longer a given? When someone is accustomed to a particular individual being constantly nearby, initiating contact, persistently seeking interaction or patiently waiting, and then suddenly realizes the absence of former certainty in their constancy, their perception of that person undergoes radical changes. As the distinguished psychoanalyst Carl Jung wisely noted, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves. It is at the moment when a person distances themselves, when they cease to be easily accessible, that the other individual comes face to face with their own reality, deprived of former external validation or approval. And it is at this pivotal moment that a deep internal conflict arises. In the initial stage, which can be termed the phase of pseudo-indifference, it initially appears as if nothing is happening. The person in this situation continues their usual life, as if the other's absence has no effect on them. It is at this juncture that many make a critical mistake. Observing the apparent lack of reaction, they conclude that their presence never mattered, yet they are unaware that the human mind psychologically requires a certain amount of time to fully process the fact of absence. Initially, this person tends to assume that the distance is temporary. They are convinced that the one who withdrew will eventually return. It seems to them that this is merely a fleeting phase. However, as the days pass and the initiator of the distance still doesn't appear, doesn't show persistence, doesn't seek contact, the situation subtly begins to shift. Then comes the phase of confusion and deep doubt. At this critical moment, the other person's mind actively begins to ask agonizing questions. Why did the initiator of the distance stop seeking them out? Did they find someone else? Have they truly forgotten the past relationship? What was previously perceived as a given, an absolute certainty, now ceases to exist. The unrestricted access they once had to the person who withdrew completely vanishes. It is at this point that a palpable discomfort arises, escalating into anxiety. For when an individual realizes they can no longer be certain of the constant presence of someone who was always there, they inevitably confront the frightening prospect of real and ultimate loss. Testing phase, seeking a reaction. As confusion transforms into anxiety, many individuals exhibit predictable behavior. They begin to conduct a series of minor tests to determine if they can still regain control over the evolving dynamic. Some typical methods include sending ambiguous messages, such as, "Hey, how are you?" or "Oh, I thought of you today," posting indirect messages on social media platforms, hoping for a response, and inquiring about your status with mutual acquaintances. However, make no mistake, such actions do not indicate true attachment or deep feelings. Rather, they are merely a way to confirm that their former level of access to you remains intact. If, at this critical moment, one responds with the same degree of availability, the situation will inevitably revert to its original state. The individual will once again become predictable, the other party will regain certainty in their constancy, and the former interest will once again wane. However, if one remains steadfast in manifesting this renewed energy, the next stage of events becomes inevitable. Attraction, or final rejection phase. At this stage, the situation reaches its ultimate resolution. If a genuine, deep connection truly existed between the individuals, if one of them internally valued what the other offered but never openly acknowledged it, the interest of the first party will significantly increase. This party will make active attempts to reconnect, demonstrate heightened attention, and exert significant effort to regain what was lost. However, if the interest was based solely on your constant availability, it will simply fade away. This outcome, in essence, is the best possible development. Ultimately, when someone is no longer certain of your constant presence, only two alternative reactions emerge. If the value of your presence was genuine, they will take active steps to win you back. If your presence was merely held by habit, they will let you go without hesitation. Both of these outcomes are a blessing, as in either case, the individual retains control over their own energy and emotional state. The final lesson that life sometimes imparts with particular clarity is this: when a person is no longer perceived as a given, they immediately become an option worthy of the closest consideration. If someone knows for certain that another person's presence is always guaranteed, there is no urgent need for them to properly value or acknowledge that worth. However, as soon as a feeling of potential loss arises, the perception of that person automatically undergoes significant changes. But the most important aspect is not what someone else does or feels. Most significantly, upon reaching this critical point, the individual no longer needs external approval or validation of their own worth. When an individual ceases to be constantly and unconditionally available, when they actively restore their internal resources and energetic balance, and finally, when they become less accessible to those who were accustomed to their unwavering presence and took them for granted, then profound changes occur in how the surrounding world perceives such a person. The great thinker Carl Jung once sagaciously remarked, "Do not hold on to him who is leaving, for then he who wishes to approach will not come." And in this expression lies the true key to change. When a person masters the wisdom of letting go, relinquishes the constant search for external approval, and begins to consciously and selectively share their life energy, then suitable and harmonious individuals are naturally drawn into their life without the slightest need for active seeking or persistent pursuit. But how does one apply this inner power with true awareness? How can a person ensure that the respect and genuine admiration they evoke are authentic feelings and not a fleeting response or a superficial reaction? The answer lies in the following. The first and perhaps most fundamental step is this: never again waste effort trying to prove your own worth. Allow others to independently recognize and realize the true value of your personality. For one of the most common and often detrimental mistakes many make is the persistent attempt to convince others of their own significance. Such individuals sometimes launch into lengthy explanations of their merits, detailing what they've done for others. They exert excessive effort trying to meet someone else's expectations, to be good enough, or diligently attempt to convince those around them that they deserve to be chosen, accepted, or valued. However, the reality is that those who genuinely respect a person need no proof of their worth. When a person stops trying to impress, when they simply live, guided by inner confidence and self-sufficiency, their true value becomes evident and undeniable, requiring no further justification. This is precisely where the fundamental difference lies between those who inspire genuine admiration and those who are merely tolerated. An admired individual simply exists, residing in their authenticity. Someone who is merely tolerated, conversely, tries too hard to conform or please. Therefore, you should stop trying to prove anything. Just be. The second stage, don't chase, attract. Respect and genuine admiration are not achieved by persistently pursuing others. Instead, they emerge when a person becomes the kind of individual who doesn't need to chase anyone. If you consider those you admire most, they are typically not the ones desperately seeking attention. Rather, they are those who possess a powerful presence without apparent effort. True magnetism manifests when a person lives with deep purpose, so focused on their own growth, goals, and personal well-being that the approval of others ceases to be a priority. And this is where it gets most intriguing. When a person stops desperately seeking attention, they begin to receive it in abundance, as scarcity always creates value. If an individual is available to everyone, their energy inevitably becomes commonplace. However, when they are selective about with whom they share their time, people begin to perceive them as special. This doesn't mean intentionally ignoring others or playing hard to get, but rather a deep understanding that not everyone deserves access to your inner world and time. The third, and equally important stage, involves raising your personal standards and adhering to them rigorously. If you genuinely seek to gain authentic respect and admiration from others, you must first demonstrate your own worth to yourself before expecting such recognition from others. How can this inner conviction and outward demonstration be achieved? It's done by resolutely refusing to accept the bare minimum, especially if driven by the fear of isolation. You must stop giving second chances to those who have repeatedly shown their inability or unwillingness to value your true significance. It's crucial to learn to say a firm no without the slightest guilt when circumstances or relationships offered don't align with what you truly deserve. Furthermore, you should avoid reverting to old, sometimes destructive patterns of behavior simply because they feel familiar and habitual. For here lies an undeniable truth: the respect an individual receives from others is nothing more than a direct reflection of the respect they show for themselves. If you continue to settle for scraps, the world will consistently offer you only those meager remnants. If an individual persistently justifies dishonest or dismissive treatment of themselves, they will inevitably continue to attract people who exhibit such behavior. If a person allows themselves to be treated as merely one option, they will never become a true priority for others. However, when an individual decides to raise their standards and demonstrates unwavering firmness in upholding them, truly suitable people begin to enter their life. This happens because only those who genuinely appreciate the richness and uniqueness of what you have to offer will remain by your side. The fourth stage involves cultivating an aura of mystery and exclusivity around yourself. The most admired individuals are not those who are constantly available. On the contrary, they are individuals with their own deep, unique world, so captivating that others feel an irresistible urge to be part of it. When a person leads a rich life, filled with genuine passions, clear goals, and strong emotional independence, they naturally become magnetic. And here lies a key aspect: people respect and admire what they cannot fully grasp. There's no need to reveal every facet of your personality. You don't need to be constantly visible. You don't have to share every detail of your existence. When some aspects remain hidden, when a person's inner essence isn't easily accessible, it sparks a natural desire in others to learn more, and it is this quality that makes a person truly irresistible. The fifth stage calls for continuous movement and a complete refusal to halt your development for someone else. If there's one thing that can destroy respect and admiration, it is undoubtedly dependence. The moment an individual puts their own life on hold for someone else, when they make another person the center of their universe, they inevitably lose the inner strength they painstakingly built. People feel deep respect and genuine admiration for those who consistently move forward, regardless of external circumstances. If someone leaves, the individual continues their own path. If someone else's choice doesn't fall on them, they still continue to grow. If something doesn't yield the desired result, the person learns a valuable lesson and continues to evolve. For this is where the significant distinction lies between those who inspire admiration and those who are forgotten. The former steadily move forward, pausing for no one. The forgotten, however, remain prisoners, waiting to be chosen. When a person's existence depends entirely on themselves, others have no choice but to feel deep respect for them. The final lesson. The essence of the power of being unattainable lies in an individual's unshakable confidence in their own essence. This doesn't require arrogance, ignoring others, or feigning indifference. It simply means having a deep awareness of who you are and what you bring to the table. When an individual possesses a clear understanding of their worth, respect and admiration arise naturally, without any effort. If a person isn't seeking external validation, those around them feel the need to affirm their significance. The moment they become a purpose-driven individual, the right people are inevitably drawn to them. And here is the absolute truth. Once a person reaches a state of being unattainable, they no longer need to actively pursue or strive for anything. Everything meant for them comes